You are listening to Beyond the Measure, episode 43. Listen as I, a young composer, and my wife, a young choir director, interview other music educators in order to gain insight into their own success in the classroom. We have a lot to learn, and we want you to learn with us. No matter your age, ensemble, or experience, this is the ideal podcast for music educators, composers, and students alike. So join us as we go beyond the measure. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. My name is Christian.
My name's Kara.
And this is the Beyond the Measure podcast for music educators. If this is your first time listening, this is a show where Kara and I, we just interview a bunch of different music educators from a variety of backgrounds to learn as much as we can from them and how we, and hopefully y'all listening as well, can implement this into your classroom experience. We're going to jump right into introducing today's guest, who is Dr. Christopher Rosborough. So, Kara, do you want to go ahead and read his bio to us?
Dr. Chris Rosborough is Associate Professor of Music and Director of Choral Activities at Howard Payne University in Brownwood, Texas, where he teaches early music history, choral conducting, music technology, and directs the HPU Concert Choir, University Singers, and Heritage, the Chapel Band. Additionally, he is the freshman advisor for the Department of Music. Rosborough received the Doctor of Musical Arts from Louisiana State University under the tutelage of Dr. John Dixon. While at LSU, he was the assistant to Dr. Dixon and worked as assistant conductor in Tigerman's Glee, a cappella, and chamber singers. In 2019, HPU choirs were invited to sing Mozart's Requiem in Vienna, and Rosborough performed the tenor solos. He received his Master's of Music in Vocal Performance with emphasis in church music from Mercer University, where he was the recipient of the Townsend School of Music Fellowship. He holds bachelor's degrees in music education and vocal performance from Howard Payne University.
Yeah, and so for this interview, I forgot to mention, this is one of those where, Kara, you were out for, I think school had started by this point. So and this was during the day. So this is just, a solo interview of me talking to Chris. But some of the things that we focus in on for this episode is actually very applicable for the time that this episode is releasing, now that we're getting into the holidays, which is all about lessons and carols services and church services, which is something that for me, and I know for you, Kara, that we were not very familiar with our background and how we were raised in church. And so this was a great conversation for me to learn more about that. And it's also really good for anybody listening that might be interested in doing some sort of music Christmas themed service going into this season. Now, it might be a little too late at the time of this recording for this year, but it's a great thing to be thinking about at this time of year, maybe going into next year. And because Chris has lots of experience putting on lessons and carols and what that can look like and the kind of flexibility you can have in making it unique and fit for your resources, whether you're at a large or small church. Another thing that we talk about in this interview is what it looks like sometimes whenever you have a smaller ensemble. I mean, maybe even as little as 10, 15, or even less students in your group. And what do you need to do to innovate in order to make the most out of the students that you have? And sometimes that's just the boat we find ourselves in, but you got to work with what you have. And a lot of great things can still come out of that if you learn to innovate with what you have been given. And so that's a great conversation. We talk a lot about some other things as well, but those are some of the main focuses here in this interview. So without further ado, we'll get into the interview. Once again, if you enjoy this show, this episode, please consider subscribing to this podcast, maybe even leaving us a review. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Here is our interview with Dr. Chris Rosborough. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate it.
Of course, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I've been wanting to interview you for a while now, and we were just talking. It's one of those hard things, schedules and all that can be really difficult to navigate. But I'm glad we're finally here, and it's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think we first connected at it was at a region. Was it Region 6 that we met one another, I guess, officially?
Yeah, I think that's right, because Kara was the director at Clyde High School at the time, and it was for one of the all-region, all-state concerts, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I think, let's see, 21 maybe?
Yeah, 21, 22 that season in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I remember seeing you, being able to sit in the room and see you work with all the students in there, and you did such a great job just working with them and making them really feel kept it very professional, but also very personal, and just, hey, let's just have fun with this. And I
Yeah,
thought
thanks.
it was really enjoyable to watch you work.
That was an interesting year because I got there and Gershom Garcia, who was at Big Spring, Gershom said, "We're going to do all of the region pieces for our concert." I was like, "Really? Okay." So, usually it's just like they choose three or four from their audition process, and I get to bring one or two. And they're like, "No, we're going to do all of them, including the pre-area ones." I was like, "Okay, here we go." And they had that crazy Latin piece oh, what was the name of that one? It's not important. It was really hard.
Yeah.
It was a big school piece they were doing for small school. And so, anyways, yeah, that was a fun concert to be a part of.
Yeah, yeah, it was great. And now here we are. And then so in another kind of connection we have, for any of y'all that might have heard some of our previous episodes, at one point we interviewed Travis Lowry, and we talked a lot about, how to work with very, very small groups.
Hmm.
And because, he's, I don't know if he still is, but at the time he was music director at his church. And, church choirs nowadays are pretty, it can be hard to have the numbers that are desired. And so we had a great
Right.
conversation about that. But you're good friends with Travis, correct?
Yeah, Travis and I got connected. Goodness, I think through a mutual friend when I first came to Brownwood about 8 years ago now, and I hired him as a soloist, and we just kind of built a friendship. We just presented at TCDA this about 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, and yeah, he and I talk often, and we nerd out on choral literature, specifically in the Anglican realm, and he's a dear friend.
Yeah, Travis has been an asset to the Abilene area, and you recently performed, this past spring for Mozart Requiem,
Oh
or was
yeah, I
that?
did Mozart Rec this past year, and then I did the Lord Nelson Mass the previous year with Chorus Abilene. Yeah,
That's right. That's right. I was thinking of the Lord Nelson Mass, and time has flown by. I thought last year was this past year because we didn't actually
yeah.
make it to the Mozart.
Okay.
But
Yeah, that was an interesting one. Mozart's not ever my friend, but uh, I could just we screamed through it. We made it.
yeah, that's right. That's right. That's how you do it. That's a good. That should go up on a choir room wall or something. We screamed
Yeah,
through it. We made
yeah.
it. Very cool. Well, I definitely want to hear a little bit more in a little bit about some of the things that you and Travis touched on at TCDA, because we weren't able to make it this
Oh
year, and we
yeah,
would have loved to hear that. But before we get into that, could you just tell our listeners what you currently do now in the music education world?
yeah. Of course. I'm at Howard Payne University, and I've been there for 8 years. My title is gets longer because the dean keeps asking me to do stuff, but I am the associate professor of music, and I'm also the chair of the department, and I am the chapel coordinator. So we have weekly chapel, so I take care of the music for that. That's one of our basically our worship ensemble. And then in addition to that, I am a part-time, bivocational worship pastor at Midtown Church in Brownwood. So that's kind of my titles. But yeah, I've been at Brownwood for 8 years. I'm an alum of Howard Payne University. So we just kind of, went and did graduate school and came back to, do life here and have been here ever since.
Yeah, Howard Payne is a. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this as a Hardin Simmons grad, but Howard Payne is a good school. Howard Payne is a good school, and no, we actually like y'all a lot. And so when it comes to just music in general, and going all the way back to who knows when, I mean, can you tell us a little bit about your journey through music? I mean, how did you get
Sure.
into music, and what did that look like for you?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up, my dad's a musician. He is a fine guitarist and actually a really good baritone. He won't tell you who he is, but he is. He sang with the Houston Boys Choir, so he's been a choir boy for a long time. We didn't have a choir where I grew up, in Wimberley, Texas, and so I was in the band and I played the trombone for about a semester, and then I switched to the tuba. And I was a tubist all the way through high school. I went to state, ATSSB 2 years, and went to Howard Payne on a tuba scholarship, actually. And then I just kind of, I don't know, I didn't necessarily stop liking the instrument, but I started taking voice lessons with Greg Church, who was my teacher and colleague actually up until about 2 years ago. He just switched schools, but started taking voice lessons and just, man, I just fell in love with singing. I had kind of a knack and niche for it. I enjoyed choral music a lot, and I had kind of found myself in predicament going, okay, I thought I was going to be a band director. I always knew I wanted to teach college music, but I never liked marching band. I was like, there's something to be said for this choir thing. And I really just kind of fell in love with it and put the tuba down after about halfway through my sophomore, no, halfway through the end of my sophomore year. So just kind of started singing and ended up finishing a degree in voice performance and a degree in music education at Howard Payne in 2008. Met my wife there, and we were it was a classic music building love story. 8 a.m. music theory, man, she's a great mezzo. And the rest is history there. And we've been together for 16 years. We have 3 kiddos. After we finished up at Howard Payne, I taught middle school in Granbury, Texas, at Acton Middle School, and got hooked up with my friend Christine Bridges there. Actually, she's not Bridges anymore. But that's not important. It's Adams now. Christine was a good friend, and kind of helped me get my feet wet in education. And that's a great program to start in. I wasn't left kind of high and dry doing my own thing. Granbury is a well-established program. And so I was able to really get a good foundation there. I taught middle school boys, and I got a little worn from the polity, quite honestly. And that's not to say that there was a negative experience, but I was like keeping tardies at one point for the school. And I was like, I wanted to do my master's anyway. It might be a good time. So, anyways, my wife and I went to do a master's degrees in voice performance at Mercer University, which is in Macon, Georgia, the home of the Allman Brothers. If you're into that kind of thing, and also Otis Redding. But actually, a really vibrant music culture in Central Georgia, Atlanta specifically. We were about an hour and a half south of Atlanta. I started really kind of in a part-time ministry at that point, just to kind of pay the bills, as it were. But I got into the Methodist Church, which is in Milledgeville, Georgia, and started directing choirs from that perspective, and really fell in love with the aspect of choral orchestral music and what that means, especially when it comes to like things that are honoring God, a sacred form of orchestral choral music. I just loved tapping into that and learning more about that, and just said to myself, I really think I want to do that for a living. I've always loved conducting and been fascinated with that. So I really made that decision at that point to focus on choral conducting. And so I took conducting lessons and took some private lessons, still finished a master's degree in performance or in voice performance, but began to work on my conducting chops at that time. We went to Mercer specifically because John Dixon was there. John Dixon was at Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky for years, and then was at Texas Tech and had a great run there, and then went to be the dean at Mercer, and just kind of got connected through him, through our teachers. And I feel like that's the way it goes in academia. You're just following people's teachers around, and all the stream leads to the same place. But
It's true.
C. David Keith was also there, and he was at Southwestern Seminary for like 30 years. And so there was just these 2 mega choral musicians, in particularly in church music, at the same place at the same time. So it was a great time to be there. And I say that to say this: I followed John Dixon to his position at LSU, where he retired just recently. So finished my terminal degree in choral conducting at LSU. Still, again, spending a lot of time on studying voice. I did my minor studies there in voice performance with Bob Grayson, who was at New York City Opera for a number of years. He sang something like 60 Rodolfos from Bohème, and he's just an amazing teacher, and I've enjoyed my time with him. Also, just a shout out to Rich Kosowski, who was my master's teacher, and really a fine pedagogue and fine teacher, probably one of the best teachers I've ever had. So after LSU, I still kind of continuing in ministry in Methodist churches. I was at Baton Rouge First United Methodist Church, as their associate worship director. And then I stepped into full-time contemporary worship at that church as well, when I was basically trying to find a job and writing my dissertation. And the job opened up at Howard Payne. I got a call from Dr. Feast, who's the dean currently and still my boss, and the rest is history. And I've been at Howard Payne doing our thing ever since. So that's maybe a little long-winded, but that's the journey.
Right. Oh yeah. No. It's surprising how commonly we interview people, and they have a very winding journey, whether that's through different schools or positions or ensembles and all those kinds of experiences. And it's kind of crazy how common that is. I did want to make a comment. So you were one of those students in high school that switched from band to choir. Was that like a full switch, or you said you didn't prefer marching band, but did you still do like concert band or anything?
Yeah, so I didn't really have the option at Howard Payne because it is so small. It's like if you're in the marching band, you're in the concert band.
Right, right.
And you might have there might be a similar thing at Hardin Simmons. But I stayed in the band because I enjoyed it and because, I really did enjoy the concert literature. But, I still played through my undergrad in the band program and still love instrumental music, but just kind of found my niche in choral music.
I was gonna say, I remember. I mean, even as far back as in high school. I mean, not just for college. I feel like, I mean, we didn't necessarily get like a whole bunch of students that I feel like that switched over to choir from band, but the few that did, they were always such great people to have in the choir,
Yep.
because they just had a sort of tenacity to them where they were able to just jump in musically, in whatever context that was, whether it was just, UIL or show choir or something like
Yeah.
that. And no matter what their experience in singing was, I always thought it was really admirable. Their love for music was always pretty clear, even if the way they expressed it changed. And even in college at Hardin Simmons, I think a lot of times there's a greater chance you'll see band people be able to participate in choir than choir people in band, because band kind of
Yeah.
scares them, and learning the whole
Yeah,
instrument
well,
thing.
that's kind of the thing. You can jump into a choral music thing and be a participant as an instrumentalist pretty quick. And actually, like you said, they're an asset, not just like you said, their tenacity and their willingness to kind of jump in, but I mean, the musicality level is on a different scale. Like so,
Right.
you know, when the freshmen that come into Howard Payne in sight reading one, the stronger sight readers are the instrumentalists, not the vocalists. Most of the time, that's not always the case, but there's something with the instrumental background that just helps kind of facilitate the singing side of things, And that's not demeaning to all the throats out there,
Right.
we, but that's just kind of reality.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we always joke in choir, though. We do say when a band student comes over to choir, we're like, okay, you came to the light side
Yeah,
finally.
that's right. That's right.
That's great. Perfect. Before we get into kind of what y'all had talked about at TCDA, I do
Yeah,
want to ask about those first couple years. You said you had just come right out of your undergrad
yeah,
and you were teaching middle school. It was middle school choir for
right.
how long was that?
2 years.
2 years. What did that look like? I mean, take that. You can answer that however you want, but I mean, what do you remember kind of feeling and experiencing just as a
Sure.
brand new teacher going into that? Because I think we do have a good few young or about to be first time teachers listening to this show, and I'd like for you to just kind of describe that a little bit.
I think it was a good experience overall. I know I may have said something that may have tainted it earlier, but no, I love working with the kids. Granbury has traditionally a very strong choral program. We had almost 200 kids in that sixth, seventh, and eighth grade campus, and so it was a necessity to have two teachers there. So the model I stepped into is we co-taught our sixth grade classes, and then as the female teacher, Christine, my colleague there, took the two women's choirs, so seventh grade choir and eighth grade choir. And then I took the two male choirs, so seventh grade boys, eighth grade boys. And we mixed them periodically, for contests, et cetera. But that's kind of the model I stepped into. I think what I learned in that process is building systems early on for success and asking for help to do that are so important. So I still am. I'm really big on musicality and musician building, that I leave things like sight reading in the dust a little bit. I think it's so important that you have a system for doing the things that are honestly, and this is sometimes an unfortunate truth, but that you're graded on.
Right.
You've got to go to contests and you got to do the things, and sometimes that's an unfortunate thing because you miss out on some of the things you really want to dig into. Like, okay, let's talk about the poetic textual relationship, the musical textual relationship. I mean here, and that's the stuff that I like to dig into. I like to pull out the person in the music as opposed to just learning what's on the page. But at the same turn, you can balance that as you build systems. So don't take don't take for granted the time that you have because it can go very fast. You're like, you get to contest time, you're like, oh my goodness, we can't sight read our way out of a paper bag. Now I'll say we still got twos in sight reading every time we went to contest, and we got ones on the stage every time. That's just kind of where it ended. But I had my boys sing the Sanctus from the Schubert Mass in G, which is it's in the Episcopal liturgy, the Holy, Holy, Holy. And I grew up in the Episcopal church, and so I was like, we're going to do this. And so I had these seventh and eighth grade boys singing 4-part boys choir music, and it was awesome.
Wow.
And I loved it. And again, the sight reading took the hit because of that, but that's okay. I was okay with that decision. I also, and this is the thing I do at Howard Payne too, I always pre-program. That's what I call it anyway. In other words, how can you use the same piece and get more mileage out of it? If that means you take a Christmas piece as your choice piece to contest, do it.
Yep.
I mean, they don't care.
No shame.
It's functionality at that point. If it's a great piece and it shows off your choir, how can you get the most mileage out of that piece? And that may be something you use for an opening ceremony, and like it's a benediction or something. Something that you can program to get a lot of mileage out of.
Yeah, definitely. I know Kara has done that. In fact, we were just talking like last night, and she was showing me some of it's always fun. I get to see the rep that she's combing through and deciding on for the year. And she was like, I think I might do this one for fall concert and then take it to UIL. And it's like, yeah, great. I mean, they get good at it, and they get to really show off that kind of growth, especially throughout the full year. And honestly, I kind of thought of this too. It's really not that unrealistic when it comes to preparing students for when they get older, just because there have been many times where even in college, we sang a certain piece throughout the full school year for whatever reason, or that was preparing for different events and things like that. So
That's great. Yeah. So I'm trying to think back. That was 2008 to 2010, and just kind of special moments. I did get to be a part of musicals at that school, which is really cool. I mean, you don't get that very often in middle school, but we did Seussical Junior and then Guys and Dolls Junior.
Hey, I was in Zoo School Junior in 5th grade.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was a different experience. I had been in shows before in college, et cetera, but doing that with middle schoolers, that was a whole different animal, and getting them ready for roles. But the culture was there, and honestly, it helped the high schools because they do big scale musicals every year too at Granbury. So it was in the culture, but to be a part of that was fun, and it's helped me getting into things like children's choirs at church, et cetera, to just think differently about the choral education experience, because not all those kids are going to be in your choir class. They might just be in the theater class, the band class, and they want to do a show. So you learn a little bit about remediation and how to get people on the same page at the same time.
Okay. Would you like a way to create a special moment, a unique memory that only you and your students can share? Is there a certain audience you will be performing for and you want just the right type of music for the occasion? Or perhaps you're just in need of a piece that has a specific voicing, range, or theme that you haven't been able to find anywhere else. I mean, last time I checked, publishers weren't scrambling to create music for a bassoon, alto voice, and accordion trio, but maybe that's what you're looking for. No matter the reason or the instrumentation, I would love to fulfill your music needs in the form of a commission. If you're unfamiliar with what commissioning me would look like, or even any composer for that matter, you can learn more about the process at christianfortnermusic.com/commission. This includes info such as the step-by-step timeline, payment options, and more. I want to work with you so that we can create a memorable experience for everyone involved, including you, myself, the performers, and the listeners that will hear the music for years to come. Because remember, you never know whose lives will be changed for the better because of the music that came into existence because of you. So are you ready to make a new memory through new music? I am. Take the first step by filling out a commission request form at christianfortnermusic.com/commission. Hope to hear from you soon. I remember very vividly, I mean, this was in high school, but I'm sure the same still applies to middle school. I mean, I remember seeing, being in the musical and then the following year seeing choir students who weren't originally involved in theater get involved in theater, and theater students who weren't originally involved in choir get involved in choir. And those sorts of opportunities for collaboration are great. And I
Yes.
mean, and Kara is actually, we might have to do an episode on this once it's over, but Kara is actually, for the first time this year at her middle school, for the first time they're doing a musical. They're going to do Wizard of Oz. And so she's going to be collaborating with the theater director. And so it's kind of a first for both of them since they're
Awesome.
both pretty early in their careers. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's awesome. That sounds like a really exciting opportunity.
Cool. Well, that's great. That helps a lot. So going more into what you had recently talked about at TCDA, tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about what kind of session y'all presented, and give us a little taste of that.
sure. So Travis and I are both church musicians. You know, we have been. I've served in a variety of capacities. So I'm at a modern church right now, but I've served in the Methodist Church for a number of years. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, so you know I'm not a stranger to liturgy and have enjoyed that. And honestly, I found a greater love for that genre when I learned about it in graduate school. I was like, wow, this is really special. You know, I've known it, I've heard it, etc. But as I dug into it, realized how special it was. So we presented on the Lessons in Carol service. And for those of you unfamiliar, that's out of King's College in Cambridge. They just celebrated their centennial year in 2018. It's been going on for a long time. And we just talked about the practicality of building out a Lessons in Carol service for a small church, and what it looked like for my church and what it looked like for his church. Now, he was speaking from his experience with Stephenville Methodist, First Methodist Stephenville. And I brought a different angle on that because we've done, over the past 2 or so years, done a modernized version of that Lessons in Carol service with kind of a praise band setup. And so talking about how that service is flexible, you can, it doesn't just have to be 9 choral anthems and a few carols here and there. I actually broke it up to where I included skits with the children's ministry. We had some sign language involved in that, just to kind of add different elements that make it special. It also takes the demand off of the ensemble that they're not doing actually 9 whole pieces to get
Right.
together for a
Yeah.
service. But I've also done that service with the Howard Payne Choir, and it's the straight up 9 choral anthems. But we have at least half a semester, at least, sometimes longer, to get that ready. So we just again talked about the way that you can manipulate that service, I guess, for lack of a better word, to let it be special and unique to you, to your ensemble, to your congregation. And that's kind of a broad brushstroke, but that's kind of how we spend our time.
Very cool. Yeah, and I'll say from my own experience growing up, I've grown up in a Christian home, and I've gone to church my whole life. However, I grew up in a kind of your more typical non-denominational context that you have a lot of nowadays with very contemporary worship band and that
Yeah,
kind of style. And so when I came to college, I didn't even really know what a lessons in carols was until yeah, until I was invited to sing in one,
yeah,
and since then I've sung in a few of them, and I've really grown to respect that for in that kind of way to worship and to perform all at the same time.
right.
Essentially, I mean, from my perspective, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I would explain it to somebody that maybe has no idea what it is, it's essentially like you're telling a story in many ways over the course
Yeah,
of multiple pieces that are all kind of put together, but it's kind of like a story and a service that is biblical based, and that
exactly.
goes over the course of basically an entire church service. So it's kind of like instead of hearing a sermon, you're just hearing a musical performance telling
Yeah,
the story.
yeah. It's just so it starts in Genesis, and it's the fall of man, and then we go through the prophetic need for a savior, right? And then we have the annunciation of the savior, through a lot of the prophet Isaiah, etc. And then we go to Mary, and then we have the birth of the Savior, and it's the biblical narrative up through the birth of Christ, and so yeah, it's a beautiful service and can be very thoughtfully done in a number of different ways.
And again, for people that might not be as familiar with the tradition, is this the kind of thing that you have many times throughout the year, or is it more traditionally done just on like certain holidays, or how does that usually look, or is there even a preference?
Yeah, so that's actually a good question. If you're liturgically minded, the service is going to fall in Advent because of the academic calendar. There's been a few times we've performed that before Advent has started, And the Episcopal Church, it's actually their Anglican church that we perform that at, is like, I guess you can do that. It's not quite Advent yet, but
Well, actually,
yeah. And I mean, they're not rude about it. It's just like, well, we haven't
right.
started Advent, but we'll go ahead, but I mean, it is a Christmas service, Christmas specific. We traditionally have done it the third Sunday of Advent at my church in Brownwood, and it can be done anytime during the Advent season, as a special service, as a Sunday service. So yeah, it would be a Christmas specific service. But it could also be like you could model it, use that model for a different time of year, and you could look at maybe a Lenten lesson service. But there's some of those out there, like Tenebrae, et cetera, that you can look at too.
And so what does it take to successfully put on like a lessons and carols, like as far as like, I mean, do you need a huge full orchestra, or can you make do with the bare minimum, or maybe you have to? I mean, what does that look like?
Well, again, that goes back to the unique nature of the thing. You're going to build it out however it's going to work for you. I mean, it's going to be successful based on the choice of literature and the way your volunteers and or students are going to commit to that. So we spent a lot of time talking about that in methodologies at our session a week and a half ago. So I have spent probably about 20 hours or so in rehearsal with a college ensemble to get that together. And again, that's 9 lessons with Christmas carols and all the readings, ready to go. There are other formats. I think the Methodist hymnal in particular has a 4 or 5 lesson format that gets the job done in less time with less pieces. And you can build it out however, but it's going to be unique to how you want to do it. I mean, there's no fixed form to the service, but if you want to say 9 lessons and carols, well, then you're going to have 9 items that are going to need to be addressed. So whether that's through music, whether that's through drama, I've used a video for 1 lesson just because it worked. Not for this service, but I've used beat poetry in a church before just because I had that available to me. And it's just something
Wow.
different, unique that makes that service special because ultimately as a church musician, my job is to set the stage for God to show up. We want to see that veil between heaven and earth open for a moment. And as musicians, we have that opportunity to set up that environment through our praise, through our worship, and the music that we choose. And it's a fine line, I'll be honest, between emotionalism and edification of the church
Right.
and glorifying God. It really is. And that could be a whole different talk of
Yeah.
philosophizing. But, it's an opportunity for us to set aside and make holy a time of music and worship.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, humility is such a key thing for any kind of performance. I mean,
Yeah,
but that especially, I mean, you don't want to go up on the stage with the thought of this is all about me, right?
yeah, yeah. When you asked about like orchestra, et cetera, if you have those means available to you, that's great. If you're at a larger church and you wanted to program that, traditionally the service is done with organ and a cappella or accompanied choir, right? And so that's the King's College model, which you can catch this Christmas Eve on BBC Three at 9 a.m. Christmas Eve. Usually they stream it.
Oh, that's
I
cool.
think it's BBC Three or BBC Four, but I've used string quartet before at a Methodist church years ago just to help pad the choir, and they were able to just add a different element just to make it special. And that was, I think, the crux of our presentation was here's the service, build it out however you want. Here's what we've done.
Yeah, you use whatever you can, whatever you have available, and
Yeah,
and
for sure.
uh, and and I can say this from my experience. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what you have at your disposal as long as you do it for the Lord. He's gonna love that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Travis used the line and I loved it. He just said, have faith that you've chosen well. And I was like, I like that. Like that needs to be on a t-shirt somewhere.
Yeah,
You're doing what you're called to do. God will fill in the holes where you missed the mark.
that's great. So let's pretend like I am a pastor or a music director of
Yeah,
a church, and I'm kind of on the fence on, well, should I try this lessons and carols thing? Right? Let's say I've
yeah,
never done it. We've never done it before. Church has never done it, and I'm sure type of church denomination can play a big role in how it's going to be received in that kind of way. Maybe
yeah.
not, but if you're telling me, trying to convince me like, hey, you should do this, I mean, what would you say are the biggest benefits about a church doing one of these?
Again, I think it comes back to the flexibility of the service, the fact that you can build it out however you want and however it fits best. We talked about considerations like, does the pastor want to preach? Because that's half your service right there. And I would think if he's going to preach, it's going to be like a homily, something short and sweet. But no, that's something to consider. What's the format of the service? I would say go for it. I mean, I really would, and don't try to change and be, King's College. And that was the
Right.
title of our session. We're not in Cambridge anymore, because we don't have the boy scholars to come out and
Right.
fill out our ensemble. We have what we have, and so the fact that the model exists, and I mean, you can go to Google and type in 9 lessons and carols verse or readings and see those readings, and then as you might for any other Sunday anthem, find the carol that matches with this lesson, and then find an arrangement that you like. So, for instance, we started 2 years ago. We did "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus" for our second lesson. Again, it's this need of the Savior kind of idea, right? And we did the Fernando Ortega version, and his music. He's a Catholic modern hymn writer, I would say, kind of in line with Geddes and Matt Boswell, Tom Papa, etc. And then this past year, we did "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus" by Meredith Andrews, who's more kind of I think she's a Bethel artist. I can't recall, but they're different versions altogether. And so that's the thing. There's so much Christmas music out there in so many genres, by so many performers, that you can really build it out. I mean, you could do a jazz lessons and carols in a heartbeat. And in fact, that's a great idea. And I'm going to have to pocket that one,
Yeah.
because you could get a jazz ensemble together and that could be a thing, you know.
Yeah. Well, you
But
should contact Cody Hutchison, who's going to be working with you pretty soon.
that's exactly right. Listen, and with Cody and Stephen Gocher there, who's a phenomenal saxophone player, this could happen. Uh,
Go for it. That'd be awesome.
so I'm glad we had this conversation. All right.
Hey, and,
Now,
and you can share with everybody the moment you thought of it on the
yeah,
podcast.
I will. I will. But I think because of the availability of literature, it's really just the person sitting down and building it out however it fits them. And so I'd encourage anyone who's looking for ideas on their Advent liturgy to check it out and see how you can apply this service to what they're doing.
And so when it comes to kind of finding resources and places to, look for, browse, lessons and carols and
Yeah,
different things that are going to work for that. I mean, what do you recommend people start looking?
that's a great question. You can kind of take deep dives on Spotify. If you know the carol that is relative to that verse, you could just type it in and go by genre and go for it. If you are a CCLI user, you can go on CCLI and type in a carol and begin to look there. They also have theme verses, excuse me, they have the music broken down by themes on CCLI, so you can go out there and look that way. If you want, and you can include this if you want in your information, I can send you our resource library, the QR code for that,
Oh, that'd be great.
and that way you can just kind of tag it on into this conversation since we talked about it.
Yeah, we'll link that down below.
But it just gives a few ideas, bulletins, and past orders of service, and just some things to look at that we've done in the past.
Yeah, we'll be sure to link all that below, and we'll include that in the show notes as well. You can download in the description, and yeah, that's a great place to get started. Perfect, awesome. Anything else you want to share regarding that subject?
I think that's good on lessons, especially if you let me share that QR, that'd be great. We'd love to share what we kind of came up with.
Well, that's awesome. Well, before we wrap up, I mean, is there anything else, music related that you want to share with our listeners?
Well, so at Howard Payne, I've had a really unique set of years. I guess tenure is a better word, because of enrollment, that same thing y'all are struggling with, honestly, at Howard and Simmons. It's like, how do we turn this boat around?
Yeah, it's
Um,
like all small schools these days.
yeah, and so I started with about 27 singers, and not without lots of effort in recruiting, et cetera, we average below 10 and have for the past couple of years. So yeah, because of the unique nature of our institution, we've been working very hard to maintain a choral ensemble at all. we've actually put a lot of emphasis on our worship ensemble because that's not just strictly the music students, it's across campus.
Right.
And it's helped us kind of sustain a little bit. I've had to think differently about my approach to and teaching because I'm not getting music majors in the voice area, just kind of a handful here and there. I had several when I started, and those few have kind of tapered down throughout the year, and that's just kind of what's happened. But anyways, I've had to think very uniquely about the choral ensemble specifically because I don't have the level of singer that some might at a college program. So
Right. Right.
we just have to work with what we've got. And I'm thankful that I've had the opportunity to be here and grow here as a person and as a musician. But one of the things that I always emphasize is what I would call like pedagogy from the podium. I like alliteration if you haven't picked up on that yet.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I always freak singers out because I'll say something like, "I'm listening inside your mouth right now." Um, but I'm a singer that waves a stick. I'm always thinking about the voice, and I teach private voice here, and so I'm always thinking about, okay, how can that voice make the sound that I want it to make? So I'm thinking of each of my singers like a voice teacher. And so I'll specifically focus on the growth of an individual and work to build that voice so ultimately they can master the musical requests that I'm giving them. So I'll do that by setting up like specific vocalises at the beginning of the lesson that may be kind of like pointed in that specific singer's way, whether they realize it or not. I spend a lot of time doing vocalises at the beginning of our classes together because they need the voice training. And really, most of those singers aren't in voice lessons anyway, so they're not getting teaching on the voice.
Yeah.
So I spend at least 15 minutes out of a 50-minute class working on voice building. So I'm thinking of my choir room as almost like a class voice experience and working to build those singers individually. So that's something like I like to focus on.
That kind of got me thinking in a situation like that. I mean, it really forces you to innovate as a teacher and as
Yeah,
an educator and how you interact with your students
yeah,
and especially, I mean, if your choir ain't growing, then you've got to grow in
yeah.
some kind of way, right? I mean,
Well, that'll
what
preach. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, what not saying that like you're doing a bad job or anything,
no,
right? But it just means you've got to innovate, like I said, and think of new ways to really interact with the students. And I would say there actually definitely are some benefits to that, having that small of a group. You're allowed to really hone in on each of them individually,
yes,
vocally.
yes, yeah. I know probably by the fourth week of classes, I know pretty much every voice in there and like where their faults are, not their faults like as a human, but vocal faults are real.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and and I'm thinking about how to address those things. And we're open enough to where I'll just say like, hey, so and so, you need to shape this vowel here instead because your voice is going to like it better. And so I've had enough time in the private studio that I can address those things pretty quickly. And so I would encourage listeners to think about how you are being a voice teacher from the conducting platform because you'll find that your choral tone overall will grow so much if you can help the voices individually because they'll have a better mastery of their voice and what I say an intimacy with their voice so they can make the adjustments that they need to make in order to get the sound that you're wanting.
And every person hears instructions differently
Of
in
course.
how to sing a certain way and a certain technique, and so it's and obviously that's just something you have to learn to really balance, especially when you have a larger group. It's not like it's you're able to do that on an individual basis, but I feel like any opportunity you have, like you said, that's a great time. You want to be sure to take advantage of that.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess that's one of my pillars. I would call them a pillar that it's from my educational philosophy. All those things you have to write when you're in school. The other thing I look at a lot, and I spend a lot of time on this, and I used to spend more time on it, but it's the concept of, musical textual relationships. I feel like I've connected the most with choral music through the words that we get to sing. It's unique in our art form. I love orchestral music. I love wind band music. I love chamber music, but we get to use words, and I believe there's power in words, very much so. And so I spend a lot of time just unpacking and actually looking for those texts that are profound, that connect people not just with the music but with themselves. I love specifically like the George Herbert "Love Bade Me Welcome." I think Kenneth Jennings has a great setting of that. Of course, there's the Ray Vaughan Williams Five Mystical Songs setting of that. That's the best. Anybody can argue with me, but it is. I wish I was a baritone so I could sing that. Um, it's a high baritone part. I'm gonna give it a try.
Yeah.
Um, but when you look at that poem, the duality of love being Jesus and the guest, which is man. There's that first line, love bade me welcome, but my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first interest, and drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. And so there's that automatic sense of broken individual, but a savior saying it's okay. And it shapes the entirety of the text. My teacher, again, John Dixon, was huge on this subject specifically. He talked about the anatomy of language, and I was like, okay, help me out, Dixon. What are you talking about? But the way things are titled sometimes gives way to their character. So he always would use the description of like sports cars. Like you have the Camaro, and then you have the Camaro SS, and that sibilant consonant just makes it sound fast.
Yeah.
And then you have Lexus, which is not just fast, but it's also luxurious.
Elegant.
And
Yeah.
so the anatomy of the language sets up how we would perform something and how we can really inform, what we're performing. So I love that kind of stuff and try to pull that out with my singers.
We were talking, I don't remember who it was we were interviewing. I think it might have been Cody Hutchison.
Okay.
I can't remember, but we were talking to somebody about during one of these other interviews where, like, for me, there have been plenty of times, even as like a professional musician, harmonically or musically, I'm so focused on singing my own part all throughout the time of rehearsing that it's not even until after the performance has happened and then I listen to a recording, I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even realize this was going on in the soprano part or the alto part. Like, wow, that sounds really cool from out here. I think the
Yeah.
same can be said for the text as well. Like, unfortunately, a lot of times, many of us, we will sing through something without ever really actually stopping and thinking about what is this text actually saying and really understanding the meaning of that. And the times that I have taken the time to do that and really get that part, it's like that perfect integration of those two elements. And the picture that just comes to mind is the other thing, and then I'll stop talking.
No,
But
it's fine.
I thought about the movie, the Pixar movie, Ratatouille.
Oh yeah.
And there's like the scene at the beginning when he's like eating the strawberry and the
Oh yeah.
cheese
No,
together. And it's like,
yes,
there's
perfect.
the music and the text, like fireworks.
Yeah, no, I completely resonate with that, and that's exactly right. It's like we watched that movie a ton of times. It's one of our
Yeah.
favorite movies. The
Great.
score is fantastic. Um,
Yeah.
but I think again it builds the singer, and they find an investment in it because they're challenged by it. And when you find those specific pieces, and every piece is not going to be like poetic sugar stick, especially if you're
Right.
singing something with a repeated text. Okay, we get it, Gloria, y'all.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you find a few pieces that people can really connect with. I always try to fit some of those in, at least two, that we can just, hey, let's dig into these a little bit. And honestly, it all of a sudden you stop specifically focusing on the mental capacity it takes to make music, and you open up the spiritual capacity to make music, and you open up the individual. And I try to, like, if I do a region choir, that's my goal. Like, I need
Yeah.
souls to open up just a moment, and then everything will shift because
Right.
their personhood is committed to at that point. So it's a goal that I reach for, not for any kind of affect or to kind of say, oh, look how profound I am as Dr. Roseborough. That's never my intent. It's just like you just need that moment of connection with the individual and holistic ensemble. It's a special moment, and I think that's the thing we get into often in choral music. We have those moments where all of a sudden we're together without even knowing how we got there. And I
Yeah.
think I think the text has a lot to do with that. At least it has for me personally.
Definitely. And I can tell you, I'm kind of on, generally, I tend to be more on the nerdy side of, yeah, the text, but the music is what gets me, right?
Yeah,
And
sure.
I've really grown to appreciate the role that the text truly does play. Obviously being a singer, but I'll go even further and say, even with my love for just music and the sound of voices on its own, I can only think of maybe one or two instances when actually singing something like actually made me cry like
Hmm.
while singing it.
Yeah.
And there wasn't every single time that those few times that it happened, it was when I got the music and the text, and they just clicked like
Yep.
perfectly. And those were
Yes.
the moments where it was just like, oh my goodness. And I'll just share the example that comes to mind for me is The Road Home by Stephen Paulus.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Like that's just like I've sung that multiple times at this point, and still anytime I sing it in a choir, it's just like, oh, I gotta keep it together.
Yeah. That third verse, man,
Yeah.
it'll get you every time. It really will. I mean, I think that's a Michael Dennis Brown, the poet for that is I love his stuff. And if you don't know the Holocaust oratorio that Paulus wrote, to be certain of the dawn,
I don't know it.
yeah. So Michael Dennis Brown is librettist for that. It's a Holocaust oratorio. It's super cool. Yeah, I think for me that piece, I have several pieces like that, of course, but for me there's this piece by Eric William Barnum called "Sweetheart of the Sun," and the poetry is the poem's called Ruth by Thomas Hood, and I've always been fascinated with the honestly like the Hebrew roots of the Christian faith. That's just kind of one of my areas that I love and I like to dig into. But the fact that we are chosen, like you can see the church being chosen in that story of Ruth and Boaz. And it's not romanticized in scripture. Very, it's just not. It's just
Yeah.
very kind of cut and dry. But the way Thomas Hood says it is just really beautifully put. And then Eric William Barnum comes in and just kills it. There's this last line that says, "Sure, I said, heaven did not mean where I reap, thou shouldst glean. Lay thy sheaf adown and come share my harvest in my home." And that line, even right now, just saying it, share my harvest in my home, like the depiction of I'm being called out and drawn in and grafted into God's plan. It's a beautiful picture. So yeah, go listen to that today. It's so good.
That's great. That's great. Anything else you want to share regarding that?
I mean, we can geek out as far as you want to go, but no, I don't think so. I mean, those are my things that I stand on. I really like to build the physical singer. Like I want to build somebody up as a singer and then as a soul at the same time. I really aim to grow people as individuals in their spiritual self as well as their physical self.
We all need to have that deeper calling and that deeper purpose when we not just when we do music, but with everything we do. So I think that's great that you're living that out. Hey, thanks again for being on the show with us today.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, before we wrap it up, I mean, for anyone listening that might want to connect with you, maybe they have questions about whether it's lessons and carols or working with a small group or about Howard Payne. I mean, how can they connect with you?
If people want to contact me, they can reach out via email. That's crosborough@hputx.edu. And we can share that in the show notes. But if anybody wants to reach out, I'd be happy to we can set up a phone call or whatever and dialogue and be creative. And I'm sure I'll learn some stuff from you too, because we're all still learning. And I wouldn't do it alone. That's how we learn and continue to grow.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Chris, and good luck to you on your jazz lessons and carols.
Yeah, listen, I'm gonna go run with that.
That'll be great.
All right, brother. Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you, and it was a real joy.
Hey, thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
All right, have a great one.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Beyond the Measure, a podcast for music educators. We hope you learned something that will help you stress less about how to teach so that you can focus more on who you're teaching. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating and review, subscribe, and share this podcast with other music educators. See you in the next one.